Go into our first resource. This is Empire Online. It's a multi-archive project looking at British and world empires from the late 17th century right through to sort of decolonisation in the mid-20th century. So it's a mix of rare printed documents from the British Library and multiple archives around the world, as well as some really interesting material from the National Archives in the UK. Some map material, correspondence, as I mentioned, rare printed books, manuscript. And if we just click into the full documents list and just give you an idea of some of the document types. There we are. I've clicked into the main documents list here, but I'm actually just going to run a search, and our search bars are actually in the top right-hand corner here. We also have an advanced search function as well, but I'm not going to be using that right now. We'll show you that in a bit later. A search for Royal African Company. It'd be wise to do this chronologically, so I'm going to start right at the start with some early material. So we've run a search. We can see 7 search results for here, and I'm going to use this first one here. You can sort your search results by any of these metrics at the top, or actually filter using any of these. But I'm going to click into this first one here. So once we click into a document, we get to our document details page. This is where all of our metadata is going to be. A thumbnail view across the top, so we can quickly flick between pages. We can download the document or just download specific pages. And there's also a citation and export tool should you want to use this in a paper or some of your research. So a bit of background about what this document is. It's actually a charter issued by, I'm just going to click into the first image here. It's a charter issued by Charles II for the Royal African Company, which was originally known as the Company of Royal Adventurers Trading to Africa. And this is the royal charter that granted the Royal African Company a monopoly over English trade with regions and countries within West Africa. Just maybe toggle this full screen so we can see some functionality buttons across the top here for zooming, rotating, but I'm just going to toggle full screen. You can zoom right in and look at this first part. And what this charter does is it outlines the specific countries, conditions and limits to this patent. And it goes on to describe the various sort of trading activities that they'll be allowed to do, and I'll just show you in a second. Scroll down. That does also include slave trading, as well as setting up mining industries on the western coast of Africa. You can see here, really good quality scans. We do make sure that, especially our manuscript material, is really high quality scans so that you can, get right in, view every single word, especially students who maybe aren't that au fait with reading manuscript material. We can get right in, view every single word up close. I'm just come out of full screen. I'm going to move to image 6 now, just so we can look at a bit more of this charter. Again, so this is the page I was describing where it sets out the conditions of setting up mines and setting up plantations as well. Get right in and see plantations there. So we head back to the document details page. Just a reminder, this is a royal charter written in 1672. So I wanted to show one of the earlier documents. This is one of the first charters with sort of royal consent. And this was really sort of one of the highest levels of British involvement in Africa at the time, and this is one of the first charters of its kind. So a really important document, especially if you're maybe running a class on the evolution of the British Empire or the origins of it. It's these kind of documents in Empire Online that are going to be really key and perhaps something to assign to your students as a task, a pre-class task. So that's that chart. I'm going to head back to my results list when I ran the search earlier. So I'm going to click into the second one here. This is a really interesting scrapbook of material put together by the British Library. You can see here some really sort of, as it's a sort of multi-ephemera scrapbook, really good foliation here. As well as some really detailed metadata about places and names. So you can see here that my search of Royal African Companies come up under 89. So I'm going to just move over to there and see what we can find. So I know for a fact this is page 95. So again, we're using the drop down here just to flick between images. So you can either do that or you can view thumbnails of all of the pages of this document just to give you a bit more of a bird's eye view about the different sections of this particular document. So we've seen the charter for the Royal African Company set up 30 years earlier, and then we get to this, which is it's actually a list of forts maintained by the Royal African Company. Now, this is the end of the 17th century. There's a very tense political atmosphere between the British and the French and their protectorates within Africa. So it's really interesting to see this list of Royal African Company maintained forts. So as well as just being a chartered trading company, they also had a bit of a military presence as well, which this list seems to imply. You can see here grommets, guns. I think this is probably the number of soldiers on board the fort as well. We just move over to the next page. This seems to be an import and export list from various parts of Europe to and from Africa. I'm not sure the commodity. If you'd like to find out more, that I can provide links to all the documents we're looking at today, and maybe you can research these a bit more yourself. Would be quite interesting to look at. You can see here some numbers for import and export. We move to the next page. Again, more of the same. And we'll move over one more. Now, this is particularly interesting. This is actually a list of damage taken or damage accounted for by the Royal African Company, committed by the French army, I think. So again, another key document showing those political tensions around these trade networks being established. Okay, so I'm just going to head back to the documents list now. So we've seen some of that, early 18th, late 17th century material around setting up those trade networks, those early royal charters, those early sort of just trading outposts being set up. Now, as those trading networks evolved, the slave trade boomed throughout the 18th and 18th century right through to the abolition in the early 19th century. And we have a really key resource which focuses on that, and that is slavery abolition and social justice. So the two together provide a really interesting look at these trade networks in the early part of the British Empire. So again, functionality is very similar. You've got a full documents list as well as some additional features. but I'm just going to run a search in the top right-hand corner here. Actually, no, well, I don't think I'll run a search. I'm actually going to go to the full documents list. So whereas we ran a search before in Empire Online, I actually just want to use one of the filters at the top here to refine my documents list. So we can see here we have key themes, and that's because every single document in this resource is indexed with a key theme. And the reason we do that is to make sure that all of these documents, all of this primary source material is accessible for all levels of students. So these key resources really try and break down the different strata of documents and make it a little bit more accessible. We also index by region, document type, the library or archive it comes from. So I can just show you those libraries and archives for a second. And also date as well. But I actually want to refine my list by theme, and I want to be looking at African coast. I'm going to show one more document around that these royal trading sort of companies, these chartered trading companies that we're seeing emerge through the end of the 17th and early 18th centuries. And this is what I'm looking for here. So the Guinea Company, another one of these trading companies, and this is actually there was a book written by them, and this is actually a printed response by a gentleman called William Wilkinson in response to, I suppose, the claims made by the Guinea Company. And it's just quite an interesting letter in its sort of justification for these trade networks set up in Africa, the trading of people and commodities, and how it isn't just private good, but it's also it's for the good of the nation. And that's actually a word that Mr. Wilkinson uses quite a lot in this letter. So it's a contemporary letter, sort of giving justification to these sort of booming private trading companies and their place within, I suppose, protectorate space, really. And it's he uses phrases, so you can probably read there. I think that's probably zoomed in enough. He uses phrases like, vital. Vital to protecting assets that are vital to the economy and things like that. So it's very interesting language and perhaps something to look at if you're looking at, as I mentioned before, the early parts of the British Empire. Another key document. I'm going to head back and I want to look at one more. Again, another one from my refined list of African coast documents. You can see there. So we've seen the printed letter. Now I want to show you, just scroll back up towards the top. I want to show you this. This is actually a personal account. So it's a printed book from 1788. So we're fast forwarding a bit now, around 100 years. This is 1788, as we can see here in the metadata. Really key time for the slave trade. It's a booming industry for Britain as well as other European superpowers at the time. And this is actually a personal account of the captain of a slave trading ship, a gentleman called Alexander Falconbridge, and he gives a really interesting look at the process and the voyage and what it was like to work on one of these slave trade ships, on these slave ships. So I'm just going to click into the book here. It is printed. Move to pages 12 and 13. Maybe you're running a class on the slave trade, or again, the early British Empire. Britain in the 18th century, Britain in that period, the long 18th century. There's a lot of courses on that at the moment. this book it really is fascinating, especially if we're looking at those economic factors, those trade networks. You have a personal voice here that gives a really personal account, a very detailed account of the processes and the daily life of working on these slave ships. You can see here, the procurement process. And if you're running a course, it's these printed materials that are really accessible for all levels of students as well. So Slavery, Abolition, Social Justice, and Empire Online have loads of these rare printed books, rare printed letters and newspapers that are easy to read and hopefully give a really nice introduction to primary sources in this period. So they're just a couple of documents from Slavery, Abolition, Social Justice. So we saw the letter about the Guinea Company, and we've also seen this personal account from Alexander Falconbridge about working in the slave trade. Head back to the documents. I'm just going to quickly scroll through just to show you some of the other documents that you might find. And I should also mention that I know today is about the British in Africa, but Slavery, Abolition, Social Justice isn't just focused on the Middle Passage and slavery within the 18th and 19th century context. There's also a lot of material on Brazilian slavery, South America, parts of Asia, as well as modern day slavery and the campaigns against that. So it is really sort of an all-encompassing resource. And if you want to ever find out a little bit more about that, there's some really good information in the introduction tab that will give you a bit more scope around the material. So that is Slavery, Abolition, Social Justice. We're going to move on to a third resource now. Now this is Archives Direct. Archives Direct is actually the platform rather than the module. We're going to be looking at two modules within this platform, and those are Confidential Print Africa and Apartheid South Africa. Now, Archives Direct is made up of 10 modules, and all 10 modules are material sourced from the National Archives in the UK. And the majority of it is British government material, particularly correspondence and briefing reports, diplomatic writings between the London offices, the Foreign and Commonwealth offices in London, the Home Office, and embassies, Dominion offices, foreign offices and embassies, in various countries around the world. So we can see two I've already highlighted here, but there's also material, British government material covering Latin America, the Middle East, North America. Move down to the last 5. Really extensive range of Foreign Office files for China, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, as well as various countries throughout the Middle East. And also some cabinet papers from Harold Macmillan and some British government material on Richard Nixon and his time in office. So they're the 10 modules. Again, it all comes under this one banner, this one search platform. But I'm going to just show you Confidential Print Africa now. Again, so we've clicked into here. We can see it runs from 1834 to 1966. And this is where we're going to be looking at now. We've seen some material from 1788. We're going to fast forward now to towards the end of the 19th century. I'm going to run a search in the top right-hand corner here for Cecil Rhodes and Cairo. Okay, so functionality, very similar. We can filter by collection. Each of the 10 we've already seen, region, department, office as well. But I just want to click into this document here. So the functionality, the searching functionality does improve a little bit here. So we can actually see, each of the pages where our search result appears, and that's because all the material in Archives Direct is printed and full text searchable. So we can see a little snapshot of where our search results appear here. I'm going to click into this one here, but just to pull this down, we can also see the metadata here as well, and it will search across the metadata. Over across the top, as we've seen before, click into this page here. Now, Cecil Rhodes is, an extremely important character in 19th century, I suppose, British involvement in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly Southern Africa. And I found this letter, which I thought was quite interesting. It's I'm just going to toggle full screen. It's from two gentlemen, Mr. Emanuel and Mr. Simmons, written to the Foreign Secretary at the time, who was the Earl of Rosebery. And this letter is these two gentlemen sort of expressing their concern with Cecil Rhodes, his dual involvement of representing both, British governmental interests as well as a private chartered trading company. And there is concern about the smudging between this national interest and his own personal business interests. So we can see here. I'm just going to leave this letter up so you can read that. You can see here Rhodes is highlighted, so we can see our search result there, full text searchable, and it's going to be highlighted in the original image. So very interesting to see, the concern about Cecil Rhodes and what this tells us about him, his work and his the contemporary sort of feeling and impact that he had. And there's a lot of material about him within both, the two modules I pointed out, Confidential Print Africa, as well as Apartheid South Africa. The earlier stuff within that South African British government material. So there's a lot of material to research there. And if you're looking at, maybe the turn of the century, 19th and 20th century Britain, or the move towards decolonization and the withdrawal of Britain from Africa formally, then Confidential Print Africa and Apartheid South Africa are going to be really key resources for looking at that area. I'm just going to show you a couple more documents now that hopefully emphasize that a little bit more. And before we look over, I'm just going to quickly hover back over, see if we have any questions. No. Okay. I think we're okay for questions right now. Please feel free to put if you have any questions about any of the resources, feel free to put them in the chat window, and we can answer those. Either Laura can answer those, or we can deal with those at the end. So we've seen some material from the turn of the century. We've seen the impacts of Cecil Rhodes and the power that he gains within Southern Africa at the turn of the century. We're going to fast forward 50 years now. Just to show you, we've seen some really early material Empire Online. I just want to show you some of the later material as well, to give you an idea of the scope. I've run a search for Kenya and education. So we can see here a lot of government dossiers, British government dossiers and material on various political, social, as well as economic sort of factors and events within their protectorates in Africa. And it's these kind of reports which I think are really interesting as we click into this first image here. Now there's a quote here, and we can see how much the spending on education in Kenya rises. So this dossier was written in 1954. So we can see over 9 years that spending has gone up from 111,000 to just over 2 million. So very different to these separate chartered trade networks that we're seeing through the 18th century and really the early 19th century. Huge difference, and we're seeing mass involvement in all levels of social life in these sort of colonies now. And this sort of report on education in Kenya really, I think, crystallizes that. I'm just going to head back. So I mentioned before that Apartheid South Africa and Archives Direct, Confidential Print Africa, which are both in that Archives Direct portal, are great. But again, Empire Online really is the key resource here and is going to give you a really wide span of material. I want to show here, this is setting out a future policy, so British involvement and how they think Kenyan education should be administered going forward. Okay, so I'm going to move back to Archives Direct now, so back to the home page. I should also mention that as well as a really extensive range of material here, we've seen material from mid 17th right through to late 20th centuries. There's also some really useful contextual and interactive tools in this resource, such as an interactive chronology, academic essays, as well as some biographies, external links, which are really going to, support and crystallize your research a little bit more. So hopefully, you'll have time to explore those. And just a reminder that if you don't have access to any of these resources, or there's a particular one you'd like to access, please feel free to request a free trial, or if you know a member of faculty or a colleague who you think their research or their teaching would really benefit, let them know or give us their name, and we can absolutely get in touch and get that set up. That would be great. So we're back to Archives Direct now, and I'm just going to run a quick search for Rhodesia crisis. We're up to 1954 now, and we're going to fast forward now to the 1960s. Now, obviously, the 1960s 1962 saw Harold Macmillan give his infamous Winds of Change speech and really signified, the start of official withdrawal and sort of movement towards independence in a lot of countries. Well, it started in the 1950s, really, and the speech moved towards was a signifier, I suppose, for those countries to go independent and for Britain to relinquish its interests in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I just want to show this document here. Now, these are previously confidential notes on a meeting that was held between the Foreign Secretary and the British South African ambassador as well. And there's a lot of this material that shines a really bright light on the British involvement within the apartheid regime, its attitude towards Rhodesia and the crisis that was happening right until independence in 1980. So some really interesting, previously, top secret notes here from the Foreign Office and embassies in South Africa. I'm just going to toggle this full screen so we can give it a quick read. So this particular document is from the Apartheid South Africa resource, the module. And this particular module, it covers, not only British involvement in apartheid, but the Rivonia trial, the treatment of Nelson Mandela, political tensions and events that happen regarding, within South Africa regarding apartheid, but also around the world. And eventually, there's a lot of British government material and reports on, Mandela's imprisonment and those sorts of things. That is it. That this particular document, I think, is from 1962. And head back to the metadata so we can just check. Okay, 1966. So post Winds of Change. Again, we can see really extensive metadata here. Actually, we'll see a newspaper cutting here that I just want to quickly show you. One thing that's really interesting about all this Archives Direct material is a lot of the time diplomats or civil servants will include or transcribe newspaper articles, editorial pieces, protest posters, these sorts of things, and include them in their dossiers and their reports. So as well as, a British government perspective, they do include, snapshots of other primary sources like this newspaper, which shine a slightly different light. Again, let's maybe where we can, okay. You can see here some reports regarding the South African embassy. Okay, and that's really the last document I wanted to show.